Welcome to the Trust Factor Podcast, the only podcast that guarantees your success when you implement its divine age-old teachings. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Trust Factor for another episode. It's March 9th. In case you forgot to move your clocks forward, it's going to be a bit of a tough go in the beginning. It always is when we move that clock forward because we lose an hour of sleep. Everybody's grumpy. Everybody's feeling a little bit more tired than they normally are. Give people a little bit more rope. Don't expect too much, at least for the next 30 days. Let people acclimatize to the new time change. It might not seem like much for you, but it's a lot for a lot of people. I also want to remind you guys that we're still in the month of Adar. We're still in the thick of the month. We've probably just passed the halfway point, which means that we still have the commandment of being happy. We still have the requirement to increase our happiness. It doesn't end. And the reason I mention that is because we just came off of Purim. We just came off of a tremendously fun and emotionally high holiday. And it follows naturally that when you come off of that high, you hit a low. That's just the way that things work. And so being cognizant of that and the fact that it's still the month of Adar, a lot of people historically just forget. They build up to Purim, and Purim is the pinnacle of Adar, and then all of a sudden everything starts to taper off, and that should not be the case. We should remember that it's still Adar. We still have an obligation to increase our happiness and our joy the entire month. And also remember, I'll be here to remind you, when Adar is over, your baseline, your status quo for every single one of us is happiness. We have an obligation to be in a constant state of joy and happiness. Getting back to the book. Yesterday, we talked about specifics, details around how we understand the messages from our Creator. Why are the tribulations that we've been given the very ones that we've been given? And how do we interpret them? This is important stuff, guys, because if you don't know how to interpret the message gets lost. It's lost on you entirely, and there's no way for you to rectify it. So what's the purpose of a tribulation if it's not going to come with an instruction? It doesn't make any sense. And we laid out a few of them the other day. We're going to continue. So it starts off a little bit Kabbalistic. This can get to be high-level stuff here, but it's fascinating. So please pay attention. Kabbalistic texts teach that grief from your children comes from a blemish in that part of the soul that corresponds to thought, the brain. Why? Since the seed of reproduction originates in the brain. Therefore, when a person suffers from his children, it's a measure-for-measure message to help him realize that he must rectify something in his thoughts. His thoughts are not kosher. They're not clean. It's incredibly important to have measured, clean, pure thoughts, especially when you're in the process of procreating, of bringing life into this world. It's so important because the thought process impacts the outcome. It impacts your children directly. We see that again in the Torah, where we see that by Jacob. Jacob, our forefather, was forced to live with his father-in-law, who was a cruel taskmaster. He was a vicious man who took advantage of his son-in-law. And what did he do? Jacob realized that he had to be just as smart, if not smarter, in order to come out successful. And so what he did, without stooping to his father-in-law's level, was he recognized this very thing. And he said to his father-in-law, who was a very wealthy man, had a huge flock of sheep. He said to him, I will tend to your sheep, because you remember he wanted to marry the daughters, Rachel. And then he first got Leah and then wanted to marry Rachel. So he had to work for them. He tended to the cattle. And he said to the father-in-law, listen, I need to build up something for myself. Eventually we're going to, do our own thing. How do I build myself? And he said, I'll do a deal with you, he said to his father-in-law. All the cattle, all the sheep that are born with spots and speckles and lines in their wool, which is unsightly and not necessarily considered to be a good thing, I'll take the blemished ones. And you'll take all the pure white ones, the ones that are white as snow, that fetch top dollar. Those will go to you. And so the father-in-law agreed. At the end of the day, they were almost worthless. What do I need them for? So what did Yaakov do, Jacob? At the watering well, where the cattle went to drink, he placed in front of the watering hole a bunch of sticks stood up side by side, and on them there were paintings and scribblings of circles and dots and stripes and all kinds of different things, so that the cattle were looking at it as they were drinking. And what happened ultimately, because they were thinking about these circles and these shapes that were right in front of them, which is also happened to be where a lot of the mating took place, eventually a lot of the offspring, a lot of the flock started to become speckled and spotted, and they stayed with Jacob. His father-in-law had no idea why this was happening, wasn't aware of what Jacob knew, but Jacob knew how to utilize this very thing. So the lesson to us is, be very careful, especially around the time where you're starting to think about having children. Planning for children takes a lifetime, because ultimately they're sponges. They're going to soak up who you are, and they're going to be a miniature version of you. There's a simple story of a young yeshiva kid that goes to his Rebbe and says to him, Rebbe, I'm dating now, or I'm even just married, and we're going to start having children. When should I start learning about having kids? And the rabbi says to him, 20 years ago. This isn't something that you just pick up right now and start learning. This is something that you develop over your entire existence. It's your character. It's who you are, because that's a big indication of who your children are going to be. And that even spills over into the actual act of procreation, is making sure that your head is clean. Your thoughts are clear. You're not thinking about things you shouldn't be thinking about when you're actually trying to bring children into this world, because it does have an impact. He moves on to the wife. Trouble from one's wife indicates a blemish in that part of the soul that corresponds to what? Speech. Therefore, when a person suffers from his wife, it's measure for measure, a message to help him realize that he must rectify something in his speech. Financial difficulties indicate a blemish in that part of the soul that corresponds to your deeds, your actions. Therefore, when a person suffers money problems, measure for measure, message to realize that you need to rectify your deeds. That's what earns you a living. If you're not making a decent living, then you have to look at your deeds, meaning the mitzvahs, meaning how you interact with people, meaning your actions, where you're going, what your hands are doing, what your eyes are seeing. All of these things come together to allow you to earn a living. If they aren't on the up and up, then you're going to suffer from your living. Since God calls us his children, like I said yesterday, there are many times in the Torah where we see that we are related to him as children or as wives. In this case, he's saying his children. Problems from our own children are likely to come as a turn for a turn, measure for measure, resulting from similar grief that we caused our Creator. And he gives examples, like when a person's disobedient, your son doesn't listen to you, then that person has probably been disobedient to our Heavenly Father. Insolent children are indications of brazen and insolent parents. In our own soul searching, we should pay attention to how our children treat us, because that's your litmus test. That's your indication. That will tell you where to focus your energy on how to become a better person. Like the old adage says, that the chickens come home to roost, or the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We know that children, especially in their formidable years, are like little sponges, and they are soaking up who you are and making that a big part of the people that they will become. A wife's treatment of her husband, it says, reflects her husband's treatment of the Creator, as we just said. Therefore, a disrespectful wife is a sign that the husband is being disrespectful to his Creator. A lazy wife is a sign that the husband is lax in his duties towards the Creator. Our sages teach us that when a husband so merits, his wife is a complementary helper to him. But when he isn't worthy, his wife is against him, the enemy. Remember, I said, I think it was yesterday, when I told you about when God created Adam and Eve. He said, we need to make a helper for Adam. It's not good that he should be alone. Eselo ezer kenegdo. I will make him a helper who opposes him. Well, that opposition can be a double-edged sword. That opposition could be a wife that comes at you all the time, every time, when you're doing good and when you're doing bad, because of the nature of your relationship with your Creator that needs to be worked on. Or it could be all good. It could be a challenge that uplifts you. It could be a challenge that makes you better and stronger. It's like I gave the analogy of the basketball team. Nobody would pay money to see a basketball team playing against themselves. Nobody would pay money to go see that. And the most expensive tickets that you could buy to go see a basketball game are the championship finals. Why? Because those are the two best teams. Therefore, they are the biggest challenge for each other. And as such, people would pay the most amount of money to go see that because the game is going to be epic. It's the same thing over here. When you're being challenged in a good way, in an uplifting way, in a constructive way, then you win. And your wife has the ability to do that, to assist you in that growth. We'll finish with this Kabbalistic idea from Rav Yitzchak Luria. He said that his wife is in effect a mirror of her husband. Through her, he can see himself, his character traits, his strengths and weaknesses, and the like. For example, if the wife is angry, it's a sign that he has an anger problem. It's a mirror. Exactly that. If a person appears to be a calm individual, he should still assess himself, for he'll surely find pockets of anger tendencies that he may not have been aware of. In that respect, a wife is a magnifying glass of her husband's internal character. When she is amiss in her responsibilities towards the Creator, he is most certainly faulty in fulfilling his obligations to his Creator. Even if he is apparently observant, her failure to do the Creator's will reflects his inner spiritual weakness, for he fails to shine the light of spirituality on her. Now, there is a very, very important caveat here. Ladies, this isn't ammunition for you to use against your husband. On the contrary, you are a team, you are a unit, and you have to understand that this information can be used for or against you. The smart money will take this information and use it for themselves, not against themselves. If you use this as ammunition against your husband to even lay further blame on him as to why you are distant in your relationship, the both of you will suffer even more. If you want to get this message across to him, you send him the podcast, but do it on another day, not on a day where I'm saying it. Do it at another time where he can eventually come to this episode. Do it in a way that isn't in his face, as though you're the one to come and explain to him how to operate in his relationship with his Creator. You worry about your relationship with your Creator, and God will worry about his through you. That's it. Don't think that that's your job to now come and make sure that your husband falls in line, because nobody wants to have a drill officer as a wife. So make sure that you approach it in the right way, in a way that is uplifting and is constructive and will help both of you and your entire family grow together. Know that if you recognize that there's static in your relationship in a certain area, now you're armed with the reasons why. You can work with your husband to help him become a better version of himself, and then everybody wins. Marital difficulties are indications of the husband's lack of faith, arrogance, or lewd behavior. Yes, but don't use it against him, because that will destroy things even more. There's a right way and a wrong way to do this. Have a rabbi. Speak with a rabbi. Make sure that if it's coming from a place of real worry, that you really want to grow and you want your husband to grow, that you're consulting with a rabbi and that he's advising you on how to help your husband grow. In other words, your husband might look at women with eyes of lust. Any connection with other women, even in thought alone, constitutes infidelity to his wife. Even if his wife is totally unaware of his thoughts, the Creator knows them. The way that God will express his dissatisfaction with the husband is by the way of a wife's short temper and negative attitude towards her husband. Gentlemen, I'm talking to you now. Don't think that just because you're doing things behind closed doors that nobody knows of, that there aren't going to be consequences. There always are, because God runs the world and he sees absolutely everything. So don't fool yourself into thinking that as long as you're doing it in private, as long as she doesn't know, as long as the people who are affected by it don't know, then it's okay. You're wrong. There is an accountability. After 120 years, my friends, we come up to the pearly gates and everything is shown. It says, Sof davar hakol nishma. At the end of it all, everything is exposed. Everything is heard. And that's talking about after 120 years. So remember, always operate as though he's watching, he's on your shoulder, and he cares. And everything that you do, even behind closed doors, should always be above board. It's who you are. It's your character. Don't be one person in front of people and somebody completely different when you're on your own. That is the worst type of character flaw you can have. You need to be consistent. When you operate like that, my friend, everybody wins. Your entire family. Have an amazing day. This is meaty stuff, my friends. We'll continue with it tomorrow. Thank you for spending time with us on the Trust Factor podcast. If you've heard something today that moved you, save this episode and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss upcoming conversations that challenge, empower, and uplift. And if you're on social media, connect with us. Leave your thoughts. Drop a quote that resonated with you. Hashtag the Trust Factor podcast. Until next time, keep growing in your trust and keep living with purpose. I'm Jesse Revivo, and this has been the Trust Factor podcast. Thanks for listening.